So we learned about Daniel Boone and how he also created interest in the Tennessee area. So did all the Long Hunters. And now, speaking of that interest, so because of the Long Hunters, people started moving to Tennessee. Well, the area for what is now Tennessee. So William Bean. Like Daniel Boone, William Bean was a long hunter. He lived in Virginia. Bean hunted with Boone in the area that is now Tennessee. He must have liked what he saw because he decided to move to the area. And Bean became one of the first permanent European American settlers in what is now Tennessee. So he isn't exactly the first person to live there, but we pretty much consider him the first non-Native American to live there. Bean built a cabin on the Watauga River. Once his cabin was finished, he brought his family to their new home. His wife gave birth to a son after they arrived in Tennessee, and their son Russell became the first known European American born to permanent settlers in Tennessee. Two of William Bean's brothers-in-law settled in the area soon after him. They were not alone. Other people came to settle in this new land, and guess how they found out about that land? I bet those Long Hunters were telling them about it. Bean's home was part of one of 4 permanent settlements in the area by the early 1770s. And then we have all of this information, but these are kind of your questions on PLP. Now let's read the life on the frontier. So the frontier, remember, that means that new land that they were exploring. Settlers went west because there was plenty of land, and the land was cheap. Some people were land speculators. They would buy land from the American Indians. Then they encouraged settlers to buy it from them at a higher price. Settlers who made the journey west faced many challenges. So I also want to point out that these land spectators who bought the land from the American Indians, they bought it at a not fair price to the Native Americans. So just pointing that out. Okay, frontier life was difficult. And it was very difficult, so let's box that in. Settlers were called pioneers. I bet you've heard that word before. They crossed the Appalachian Mountains on their horses or on their wagons. Many pioneers used a special kind of wagon that worked well in the mountains. It was called the Conestoga wagon. Some pioneers traveled part of the way by boats on the rivers. So you can see right here, this is what the wagon looked like, and it has this covered area right here. And they don't talk about this in this text, but if I remember correctly, they would even use the wood from their wagon once they arrived in the place they wanted to live to help build their home. Now, I don't know if that's a fact, but I do remember reading that back when I was a kid. Once they arrived at the frontier, they had to set up their new homes. So speaking of homes, they had to set up their new homes. First, they would have to clear the land of trees. But it's okay, there were plenty of trees and they were using them all for good. They weren't just cutting them down just for fun. Then they would have to build their own cabins. So those trees that they cut down, they would use for their homes. And they would have to do it themselves. They couldn't just go to Lowe's and buy some wood. The cabins were small and many families had only one room. Pioneer families also had to grow crops, hunt and trap animals for food, and make their own clothes. So basically, they had to do everything. Most people did not have cloth to make clothes. They had to make cloth themselves out of things like cotton or animal skins. Pioneers had to make everything they needed. And I want you to go ahead and read this fascinating fact, please. Okay, once you have finished this, you are going to finish the rest of your work on PLP.